one of the things that that Emory did, and I think other campuses did this also, was to ask English professors if they would report essays on the part of their students that reflected the possibility that these students might commit some sort of violence, you know. And so he used that to talk about how that's exactly the wrong response. I mean, it's exactly the wrong responsibility to place, and what that does to the teacher-student relationship, but also how that lets the university off the hook and why they do it. They do it because they're vulnerable to lawsuits if they don't, in fact, but there are other ways that they could, in fact, anticipate, prevent, try and address those situations of violence rather than just kind of delegating that to the individual faculty member, all the implications of that. So, and when I put up teacher and student, I think the real relationship that has to be examined in institutions of higher education at this point is really the relationship between the administration and the faculty and staff. That is really, that's undergone some significant transformations, and we should talk about vulnerabilities involved in those relationships and how they should be arranged in terms of because everything, and this is back to the whole notion of labor markets, everything is commodified, everything is about economics, right? And so labor is commodified, the environment, resources are commodified, everything's subject to a market instead of being subject to state collective values and norms. So that, and that's a really important issue, I think, across all sorts of societal institutions.
Sorry, I don't realize.
Thank you for your valuable service.
It wasn't that much of a sacrifice to push the button. So I've been thinking a lot about your talk and kind of turning these conversations through in my head and trying to find the best way to ask this question. So I apologize in advance if it doesn't come out quite the way I wanted to. But first off, I just want to say that one of the things I really like about your talk and your concept is that it does really do a good job of kind of pointing at the state and saying you're really kind of passing the buck a little bit and taking care of people more generally by kind of hiding behind this idea of personalized sort of autonomy. And you're absolutely right that we do not recognize to a great degree the extent to which, you know, everyone has vulnerabilities, and the state needs to kind of be aware of that beyond just the fact that there's certain groups that might have more or less resilience than others. But I guess my question really is I wonder like how this translates, kind of moving from the theoretical to like the practical, right? In terms of like how we understand social justice movements and laws that are kind of designed to protect those populations that you classify, like that we typically classify as vulnerable, right? And I think about the LGBTQ movement as an example, right? Where this is a movement that's kind of fought for a really long time to just, it only has recently succeeded in being kind of broadly recognized as a protected class, which is kind of an extension in many ways of being a vulnerable population. It's being recognized as a group that has perhaps specific vulnerabilities based on their identity. So I guess I wonder, like, what does this do in terms of like how we deal with people that are more like systematically disadvantaged, that have less resilience, and how we make sure that those people don't get kind of displaced, I guess, or left behind in this sort of quest to provide security for everybody. So I guess, like, how does it change how, whether it's LGBTQ people, people of color, trans people, etc., like their kind of quest for civil rights and protections within the context of the state? Does that make sense?
Yeah. First of all, vulnerability does not displace discrimination. So that if you, although I will say, as a lawyer, that discrimination is a paradigm that has outlived its usefulness. And in fact, if you look at discrimination cases, and incidentally, LGBT have not gained a protective status. That is not.
They're working towards.
Yeah, we'll get there and it'll be worth nothing. Seriously. Discrimination cases are the least successful cases to be litigated, and they are the most overturned on appeal when they are successful. Judges do not believe in discrimination requires an intentional act of discrimination, and they're very reluctant to find that. There's also the notion of even recognizing historic harm, the notion of removal from that harm. This is Justice O'Connor talking about taking race into consideration. How long do we have to do that before it's no longer reasonable not to require individual personal responsibility rather than, some concern based on race. And she said 25 years in that case that involved the University of Michigan and race as a consideration in admissions. So I think that it doesn't displace discrimination, but what vulnerability does is to recognize that the effectiveness and power of a discrimination model is really, we're at the end of that paradigm and looking for, so where do we go when discrimination is no longer resonates in society, which I think is quite often true. Also, I think that that there is power in showing how, in fact, even though a group, however they're identified, may be disproportionately affected by some policy or some whatever, that they share that concern, or they share that disadvantage with others in society, that's just a politically an important thing. And it also helps, I think, conceptually, when we're trying, again, to understand what the problems really are. So it asks you, what is the problem, right? So are you concerned, is it discrimination that's the problem that you're really concerned with? Or is it poverty? Is it bullying? Is it the incivility? I mean, what is the problem that you want to get to? And does discrimination really help you get there? Or is it really, does the problem transcend the group that you're worried about being discriminated against? So I think that's one of the things we have to think seriously about.
Time for one more question. I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Or that already.
Okay, I'll go really fast. I'm still always interested in relationships and how you see them. And I asked you yesterday about kind of the role or the place of relationships in vulnerability theory, and I was really listening for it today. And today, it seemed to me that you were saying we have this kind of individual or human vulnerability, and relationships kind of protect us to some degree, or perhaps a form of resilience from some of our vulnerabilities. But at the same time, they are also a source of vulnerability. They are themselves vulnerable. You talk about the impermanence of our social lives as well as our embodied selves. And so I'm just kind of interested, and maybe you can give me something you've written on this if you don't want to go into it in depth now, but I'm interested in how are those different, the vulnerabilities that come from relationships, the vulnerabilities that relationships protect us from. I'm just, can you kind of work with that a little bit?
So again, it's important not to confuse institutional vulnerability with individual vulnerability. Okay? So the individuals exist, inevitably they exist within social institutions and social relationships, right? That they are what we create or what are generated by our vulnerability. So we need a family, we need caretakers, we need, in order to respond to our embodied vulnerability. So we create those institutions. Those institutions themselves as human creations are vulnerable. They're not vulnerable in the same way that the individuals are, but they are vulnerable nonetheless because they're imperfect, they can be captured, they can be corrupted, they can decline themselves. It's a different kind of vulnerability. So I don't know if that helps.
Right, I think I knew that.
Yeah.
So then I'm kind of trying to go a little bit farther and think about the impact on individual vulnerability of the institutional vulnerability. That's what I'm just trying to sort out, is kind of marrying.
Well, again, it's in the production of resilience because the resources and the resilience occur. So with a family, for example, the family is an institution of resilience. It can give us resilience, and can give us nurture, care, all sorts of things that give us resources or resilience in the face of our vulnerability, right? So if that family isn't functioning well, then we're not getting our needs for resilience met. That's not happening. So that's the relationship between the two. The institutional vulnerabilities may in fact prevent individuals from realizing the resources and the resilience that they need to gain. That's why you need the state monitoring of those institutions. It's why it's important when the state defines the roles within the family and the role of the family, that it do so with the idea that the individuals within that family are vulnerable individuals and not these autonomous, independent, self-sufficient individuals that we now think of as populating all of our institutions. I don't know if that helps.
I think I still have to think with it, but I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.